In the latest short session today from Robison Cooper, we're going to try and answer one of the key questions that we get asked from our clients more and more in this new world, which is, what does a good approach to wellbeing look like? How do I organise all the existing programs and support that I have in place for my employees around mental health and wellbeing? And how do we understand whether that's good, whether it's in the right direction, and what does good look like in terms of that approach? So the focus is really trying to give you and your organisation a framework that helps you think about and organise all of the work that you're doing around employee health and wellbeing, so that we can try to help you find the route back through to more good days at work for all your employees. As a really quick introduction to Robison Cooper, so we're business psychologists and wellbeing specialists. We were founded 20 years ago by our two founding directors there, Professor Ivan Robison and Professor Sakari Cooper. Our whole ethos really at Robison Cooper is around creating more good days at work. That's the language that we use when we talk around mental health and wellbeing. We feel like that breaks down stigma, and we feel like it gives a common language for anyone at any level in an organisation to have a good conversation around the mental health and wellbeing. The work we do is split across three main areas. So we work directly with clients, some of the names that you can see there, across all sectors and industries. We do a lot of research and development, so all of our products and tools, solutions are all of our own, and building on the experience and the background of our founding professors. Everything we do at Robison Cooper is based on science and research and has a real academic grounding, and also lets us turn that into practical advice, practical guidance for organisations and employees too. And we're also committed to the events and thought leadership agenda. So throughout the year, we run a series of small and large events, and the real focus there is around getting employees and employers connected to one another, so that we can all collectively try and move wellbeing up the corporate agenda. What do we mean when we talk about good day at work? This is something that we always want to get everyone on the same page with, in terms of understanding, getting that common level of understanding around what we mean by a good day. And those four boxes there really summarise what we find in the research that we've done at Robison Cooper. The top two are around the good aspect of good day at work, so experiencing positive emotions. Do you just feel good when you're at work? Do you feel a sense of positive emotions day in, day out? Do you feel things like happy? Do you feel inspired, alert, excited, enthusiastic? All those kind of positive emotions that we'd experience or like to experience with being at work. The second side of that is around social relationships, relationships with our colleagues, with our clients and customers, our line manager, our subordinates, depending on the kind of role we've got. And really what we're aiming for there is seeing that social connection, that social interaction with people forms a really key part of what a good day at work looks like. The bottom two orange boxes there represent the work part of good day at work. So task achievement is all around being able to get things done, being able to get on at work and do the things that are expected of you. And that's around really, emphasising the need for employees to feel like they're making progress as part of a good day at work. And last but not least, arguably most important, is this idea of meaningful work. So yes, it's around being able to tick things off a to-do list as part of a good day and feel like you've got that sense of task achievement. But actually, what's the point of that work? Does that work have meaning to you? Now, that doesn't mean that every role needs to be focused on some higher level goal or higher level mission, but it is about trying to help employees to connect the tasks and the roles on a day-to-day basis with something that's important to them personally, or something that's important to them as an organisation. I mentioned everything we do being based on science and research, and kind of building on the experience and the credibility of our founding directors. And this insight around what does make a good day at work comes from research conducted a couple of years ago, where we asked around 5,000–6,000 people actually tell us, what does a good day at work look like? And it's these four things that time and time again come up for employees, some more so than others, but we can always categorise a good day at work into one or more of those four areas there. So as we find ourselves in this current crisis, what does that mean? What does that look like from a mental health and wellbeing perspective? So what we've done is try and put that mental health lens on the situation and try to break this down into four key phases. I'm sure you'll recognise kind of your own personal reactions and emotions as you move through this situation, but also thinking about perhaps your family and friends and colleagues and other people working in the organisation. You'll be able to see where across this four-phase process you individually and perhaps your organisation currently sits. Phase one was all around acute uncertainty. That was kind of back in March and April, and that's a real high emotional impact. People tend to analyse quite closely what's going on. They catastrophise around events and kind of fill in the gaps provided by that uncertainty with perhaps some unhelpful thought patterns and conclusions that might not necessarily be correct all of the time. As we move through that phase, and some people move through that more quickly than others, we move through into what we call the disruption phase. And again, there's a high emotional impact going on there for people, but it's a different experience and a different set of emotions that people are feeling here. This is all around fear, so being quite uncertain as to what's going on and wondering what that means for you as an individual, wondering what that means for your role perhaps in the organisation, and also things like anger, not feeling like this is a situation in your control. That's something that a lot of people can struggle with. And also experiencing sadness. Actually, we tend to feel this guilt and this emotion of actually, I want things to go back perhaps to how they were before. And it's these kind of emotions that we're experiencing at this point. The key challenges there are around, what's our purpose? How do we still achieve our job goals and what's expected of us, given the constraints and given what's possible and the situation that we find ourselves in? Some people move through this disruption phase really quickly. Others and organisations and individual employees alike tend to get stuck in this phase and find themselves in disruption for quite a while before they can move into this third adaptation phase. Now here, the emotional impact tends to lessen slightly, and people tend to become a bit more accustomed to what's going on. They acknowledge that this is something that's going to be here for a while, and we need to find our own individual ways of adapting to the situation. So that's around exploring what's going on, experimenting perhaps with new ways of working, new ways of interacting and liaising with our colleagues and family members. And we also start to build our knowledge and understanding around what's going on in that situation. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my organisation? So it's all around trying to make sense of what are the different pressures that I'm faced with. Working at home, for example, what does that mean for me and my family? Having more control and trust in my job, what does that mean for me? Workload, has my workload increased or decreased? Has my interaction with my line manager changed? People start to try and understand what does this mean for me as an individual and start to kind of draw on their own resilience as part of this adaptation phase to really find their own personal way through it. The final phase, which we're kind of moving towards, again, some more quickly than others, and this is what's been termed as the new normal. And this is where emotional stability is kind of as we expected, pre-crisis. Things have tended to lessen a little bit. There are still emotions that people are experiencing, but it's all around continuing to adapt. This idea of acceptance, understanding what it means for me, and really being able to move through that situation. And we tend to see kind of a level of normality, albeit that's not as we kind of left it back in February and March. But we kind of tend to move towards this level of acceptance and getting back to things being as normal as possible. This idea of stability comes in a lot here. So we're trying to create a stable version of ourselves and trying to create a stable version of our organisation and find a way through that. And as part of that, we're going to identify some new behaviours that are enabling people to experience those good days at work, and perhaps we've redefined individually and collectively what does a good day at work look like for us in this new normal. Perhaps things like social relationships, which we know are one of 4 key areas as part of a good day at work, perhaps they're a little bit more hard to come by. What do we need to actively do to go and seek out those social relationships and seek out those interactions with others to make sure that we're not missing out on that important piece of the jigsaw? And there's a lot of research out there at the minute, and it tends to be building week on week, which is around actually is well-being a concern for employers. We knew going into this crisis that there was a building and a very well established business case for employee mental health and well-being. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has only strengthened that. You can see on the graph there from the ONS, that's a measure that's been in place for almost 10 years now, tracking not necessarily employee well-being, but general life satisfaction, feelings of anxiety. Do you feel like your life's worthwhile and things like that? And the blue line there represents those results over the last 6 or 7 years, really, in the run-up to the pandemic. So since 2011, you can see that anxiety, which is the one we're prioritising and focusing on there, it's kind of stayed the same. It's come down a little bit, and that's round about 3 out of 10 in terms of a 0 to 10 rating scale. You can see in the orange and red the latest results on those questions from January and from mid-April this year. That's almost doubled in terms of anxiety being a concern for individual employees. So yes, that might not all be work-related anxiety. I'm sure it's not, but this is the situation that employers need to deal with. This is what they've got to kind of get to grips with. Over 4 in 10 adults said that their well-being was affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And that's, going into a situation where perhaps people weren't in the greatest space before. Yeah, 3 out of 10, it's at the lower end of that scale. Actually, what does good look like? Should we be aiming towards more of a 2 or a 1, where people feel a lot more calm and considered rather than anxious going into this? And actually, other research from the ONS has said that out of all concerns, whether it's childcare, whether it's, still finding a way of completing work, looking after family members, whatever it might be associated with the pandemic, actually their own personal well-being was the #1 priority for people in the UK as we move through this situation. So, we don't know how people will recover. We don't know what this trajectory looks like. Are we going to see a downward trend again, where we get anxiety levels and other aspects of well-being back down to more of a normal trend? No one necessarily has got the clear answer on that, but there's clearly, as we can see there in the chart, there's clearly some worrying concerns, both for us as individuals, but also for organisations who have got a duty of care to look after their employees during all situations, whether it's a normality or a global pandemic, whatever that might be. So as we move through these phases that I talked about a second ago, as we move through phase 3 to phase 4, which is roughly where I think most of organisations, and certainly in the UK, tend to find themselves at the minute, actually, what's the key priority for employers? What do I, as the HR director of a global organisation, or the health and wellbeing manager of a UK-based workforce, what should my priority be? Actually, at Robison Cooper, our advice at this point is around, how do you effectively address the mental health and wellbeing needs of your employees as you move through your own version of this 4-phase process? What are the things that you should be doing? What are the support mechanisms? What are the programs and initiatives that you should be thinking about putting in place for your employees to help you move through this? I mentioned at the start this being a question that we get asked all the time by our clients. And what we've done over the last 2 decades, and based on our experience of working with hundreds of thousands of employees and organisations within that, and also 2 decades of science and research, much of which has been led by our founding professors, we've been able to come up with a framework that helps you to organise your approach to wellbeing, see the gaps, get in one place all of the work that I'm sure you're already doing on wellbeing, and be able to understand actually where are the priority areas for us, which aspects of wellbeing are we doing really well, which aspects do we perhaps need to spend some more time and energy and emphasis on to make sure that we're covering all bases when it comes to wellbeing. And this is the framework that we talk about. And what I'll do in a second is break down each of these areas in more detail and talk through them one by one. But I think it's helpful as we open up to see the whole framework in one piece. And we can see here quite clearly that there isn't one single solution that will improve the mental health and well-being of your population. What we can see here is it's a multifaceted, layered approach to well-being. Yes, that's complex in the background in terms of all of the different mechanisms at play and all of the different support structures that need to be in place. But hopefully what we can do using this framework is help you to think about breaking that down, organising it, and understanding where you should focus on based on your specific employee population and their needs at this time. So focusing on the centre of the model, we talk about a wellbeing strategy. Any good organisation who takes wellbeing seriously sees wellbeing as a real strategic priority for the organisation. So that's around having a wellbeing vision, a set of goals, and making sure that that's aligned to the broader organisational objectives. So what's your organisation's strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, or in the case of heading into a global recession, what's perhaps your priorities for the next 12 months or 2 years? And then how can we prove that wellbeing sits as part of that? How can we demonstrate that if we get mental health and wellbeing right, it's going to help you contribute to that broader organisational mission? And really what we mean by wellbeing strategy is it's around having that board level support and buy-in, so having commitment and sponsorship and sign up that yes, as an organisation from the top down, we do believe in employee health and wellbeing. We do think this is a priority. and actually, having the assurance and the governance mechanisms as part of that, so that we don't sign up to employee mental health and wellbeing and then really it falls by the wayside because we haven't got the reporting or we haven't got the clear KPIs, which is another important aspect of a wellbeing strategy. Clearly, data is fundamental. It's astonishing the amounts of employers and big organisations who think, and I'm sure it is the case, that wellbeing is a big priority for them, but they don't have a clear measure and a valid and reliable way of monitoring employee health and wellbeing. How on earth can you understand your priorities? How on earth can you have those measurable KPIs to monitor progress if you don't have that clear measure of wellbeing? So clearly, that's absolutely at the heart of a good mental health and wellbeing strategy. I'll talk about that in more detail as we move through. And the final point there is around a clearly articulated vision. Actually, what do we want mental health and wellbeing to look like? What do we want our culture to look and feel like in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? And there's a whole series of things to consider around there. Around, is it, do you want to move away from perhaps a paternalistic culture? Do you want to move towards a place where employees can take responsibility for their own wellbeing? Do you want to move to a place where you're breaking down stigma, for example? There isn't a right or wrong answer in there, but it's around having that clearly articulated vision and direction and mission that we're working towards from a mental health and wellbeing perspective. Once we've got that strategy in place, it's clearly then a priority for organisations to walk the walk when it comes to wellbeing. So a lot of organisations have got a really good wellbeing strategy on paper. They've got all of those things that we described there in terms of board level support, in terms of clear KPIs, data, all of those things. But actually they can't demonstrate to employees that this is something that we're serious about. And this is the second part of that framework, and that's why it's so important. We call this building positive attitudes to wellbeing. So it's demonstrating a commitment to your employees that actually wellbeing is something that we're serious around. This is things like your benefits and perks, giving people flexible benefits around things like holiday entitlement, critical illness cover, and perhaps an employee assistance program, discounted gym membership, all those kind of things that make employees stand up and think, working for this organisation, they do care about my wellbeing, they do prioritise this in their decision making, and there are programs and initiatives in place that I feel like I can get involved with that that demonstrate that my organisation is committed to my wellbeing. Communications is hugely important here. Regular board-sponsored communications that demonstrate and almost give employees that permission to think about and look after their own individual wellbeing. We've seen a lot of organisations do things like a wellbeing week, which is a fantastic way of banging the drum around wellbeing for your organisation, get people thinking, get people talking, perhaps bring in a range of providers and suppliers to run some sessions on wellbeing, and really get this idea of a good day at work or wellbeing or whatever language that you choose to use, really get it front and centre in terms of people's minds. The key trap that organisations fall into at this point of the framework is thinking that when they've done a lot of work in this area, they've got a lot of programs and initiatives in place that demonstrate that commitment to wellbeing, that's it, that's their approach to wellbeing completed. And that's the real risk of a trap that organisations fall into. As we talk more and we work through the framework, you can see that this is just one of a number of pieces of the jigsaw that need to be in place in order to have that effective approach to wellbeing. And really, as we start to build on that wellbeing strategy at the centre of the framework, then we start to demonstrate that positive commitment and demonstrate that we do care as an organisation about your wellbeing. We then move to the outer parts of the framework, which is 3 different areas of capability that you need to have in mind as you think about evaluating your existing approach to wellbeing, or perhaps starting your wellbeing journey and making sure you've got that support in place. So individual capability is all around your employees having the confidence, the skills, the knowledge, all those things to be able to let them take responsibility for their own well-being. So yes, some of this is around programs and training and initiatives, things like stress management support, things like resilience training, equipping employees to understand their own stress management techniques, perhaps equipping them to understand their own resilience and what they can do to proactively build that. But this is all, as much as that, it's all around the way that work is designed and the way that roles are designed. Are individual employee roles set up in a way that minimises the risk to their mental health and well-being? So by introducing a resilience training program, or by introducing some training on how to have a wellbeing conversation, that's a really important part of the jigsaw. But actually, if the way that employees' roles are set up doesn't support them to have a good day at work, and before they've even started to think about their own stress management techniques, their own mindfulness, their own levels of resilience, or before they've considered taking a health check, actually, are they set up? Is the role enabling them to do everything they can to have a good day at work? The second area of capability that we look at is management capability. This is equally as important as the individual side of things. I think this is a big entry point for a lot of organisations, where line managers and middle managers in particular have got a real key role to play as gatekeepers when it comes to wellbeing. And in a similar vein, this is around thinking about your management population, whether that's entry-level team leaders all the way up to senior leaders and managers, and making sure that they've got the confidence, skills and tools, most importantly, to support the well-being of their own teams. So have you got a management development program that, as well as giving the generic soft skills and perhaps the technical skills that managers need to perform their roles effectively, are they equipped to have a wellbeing conversation with their team? Do they understand the impact that they have as a manager on the way that their team perhaps experience pressure, or do they understand the impact that they have directly on the well-being of their teams? Have they got team level insights and data around well-being? So as I'll talk in a minute, organisations kind of take a real proactive, positive approach to tracking those kind of metrics. But what about managers? Does that trickle down? If we're asking managers to have a conversation around well-being with their team, and we're going to equip them and upskill them to do that, have they got all of the data and have they got the insights to have that conversation in a way that feels safe and structured, so that they aren't opening up a conversation that feels like it's something that's out of their comfort zone? And this is all around building it into team routines and processes. So we're not asking managers to add well-being onto their existing to-do list. It's really something that will help them enable them to achieve the things that are already on there. Can we put a well-being lens on monthly meetings? Can we put a well-being lens inside employee one-to-ones, performance reviews and things like that? And are you really, as an organisation, equipping managers with the knowledge, skills, confidence, tools, resources to do all of those things, and make sure that they're giving their employees the best chance of having a good day at work themselves? The final area of capability, which is probably the most important, is what we call organisational capability. So you can have really good support systems in place for individuals that build their capability to have a good day at work. You can have really good tools and support systems in place for managers that get them thinking about the role they need to play in terms of managing employee mental health and well-being. But actually, you need this organisational bird's eye view that lets you see, from a top-down perspective, have we as an organisation got the tools, got the data, processes, systems, ways of working, all those kind of things that let us support and deliver on the wellbeing strategy. So this is things like having a good occupational health pathway. As soon as someone's identified as having a mental health and wellbeing issue, or perhaps a mental health and wellbeing condition, have you got the real clear, concise, quick, easy, accessible pathway for people to access the support that they need? Going right back to things like your recruitment and induction from day one of employment with your organisation. Do your employees know where to turn? Do they know the support that's available to them? Are you emphasising from day one of their employment that you're giving them the permission to look after their own mental health and well-being, or perhaps that you expect them to look after their own mental health and well-being? There's a clear role here for policy and process as well. So going back to the idea of resilience training, it's almost, there's no need in delivering the world's greatest resilience training program for your employee population when actually all of the policies and processes that you've got in place perhaps don't encourage them to look after themselves, or don't encourage them to behave in a resilient way. So that's things like your absence policy. Is it really punitive? Are you encouraging employees to work whilst they're ill? This idea of presenteeism. Things like your return to work policy. Have you got systems and support systems in place to enable people to ease themselves back into work? More and more increasingly important, things like flexible working. What's your organisation's stance on that? Have you got a wellbeing network that lets ideas and initiatives be shared from the ground, from individual employees, all the way through things like wellbeing committees and HR committees up to the board, and circle back on those decision-making, those decision-making networks? talked a lot about data and being able to monitor and understand the impact of what you're doing from a wellbeing perspective, and doing a wellbeing survey is absolutely fundamental as part of that. When we say a wellbeing survey, we don't mean 1 or 2 questions as part of your engagement survey that perhaps ask around work-life balance, or do employees think that the organisation is supportive of their wellbeing. That's really around understanding what are the pressures that our employee population are reporting, how resilient are they feeling, what is their current level of wellbeing like, how can we create an environment that supports them to look after themselves more. Do they feel comfortable having a wellbeing conversation? It's all those kind of things that we're interested in here that really let you ensure that the individual capability and that the management capability you're building is tailored to you as an organisation, and that it takes into account the specific culture and the specific pressures that your employees tend to find themselves in. So if we put all that back together and kind of go back to where we started in terms of this framework, you can see there on the right hand side and the left hand side of that diagram all those things that I've just talked through that are important for each of the 5 aspects that I've just talked through. So back to the wellbeing strategy, all those things around having board level support, KPIs, and as we move out through the framework towards the outer layers, by demonstrating those positive attitudes to wellbeing, having those initiatives and a really strong communications approach, and then thinking about those 3 areas of capability and making sure that actually seeing these 3 capability areas almost as legs of a table, so you need to be sure that you're not putting all your emphasis into individual capability, and you're not backing that up with a strong leg and a strong approach around management capability and a strong approach around organizational capability. I think one of the key things to emphasize here as well is that less is more. It's not a case of seeing this as a tick box exercise where if you've got all of the things that you can see there, and that's by no means exhaustive, if you've got all those in place, that means you've got the greatest approach to wellbeing. Actually, it might be a much better strategy and a much better approach to perhaps pick 2 or 3 key areas from individual capability, 2 or 3 key areas from management capability, and the same from an organizational capability perspective, and do those things really well and make sure that they're all joined up to each other, and that you're not putting too much emphasis on 1 or more of those capability areas. So really, as you think around responding to mental health and wellbeing, this is something that was a priority for organisations before this crisis. And as you can see with just 1 or 2 of the statistics that we've talked around today, this is something that isn't going to go away. And that question that we at Robison Cooper get asked more and more, how do I organise my approach to wellbeing? What does good look like? Hopefully this framework gives you an idea of some of the areas that you think you need to think around assessing. What are you doing in some of these areas already? What are perhaps some of the gaps that you've identified in terms of areas where you need to strengthen your approach? And maybe some of those areas you're providing too much. There's quite often there's a lot of organisation who've got a hell of a lot of programs and initiatives and support systems and things like that, but they really only focus on that individual capability point of view. So are you better, and is it a more kind of holistic view to perhaps direct some of those resources away from individual capability and make sure that you're filling some of the areas inside the framework? Have you got a good idea of what's changed for your employees and perhaps what's impacting their well-being? This idea of data again, really there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to well-being. Taking a stock, and taking a view for your individual employee population, that will let you understand what's important for your employees and prioritise the support that they need, rather than trying to see something that another organisation has done or that perhaps has been identified as best practice that might not always yield the results that you're looking for. Have you got a clear direction of where you want to get to when it comes to mental health and wellbeing? A lot of organisations, as I've said, have got a really good approach in place in terms of a lot of support systems, a lot of initiatives, but actually they don't really know what it's adding up to. What's the purpose? How can we connect it to our goals and values and mission as an organisation? And unless you're really able to demonstrate that mental health and wellbeing and improved mental health and wellbeing is going to enable you to, as an organisation, achieve some of those goals and objectives, whether they're financial targets, growth targets, organisational transformation targets, whatever they may be, unless you're able to demonstrate that wellbeing contributes to those, it's only ever going to be a short-lived programme. It's something that you're going to focus on perhaps a year or 2 years, and then you won't continue to get that senior buy-in and that senior sponsorship, financial and otherwise, to let you continue focusing on well-being. And that final point there is around, don't get caught in the trap of thinking that your approach to well-being is really good and it's really efficient, but actually it's only picking up on one of those capability areas. I think the one where employers tend to fall into that trap most often is around individual capability, thinking that because you have a resilience training program, because you have an employee assistance program or a stress management program, that actually that's a big tick in the box for well-being. It is an important part of the puzzle and an important piece of the jigsaw, but it's not the be all and end all. Thinking around what are you doing for managers, what are you doing from a bird's eye perspective as an organisation in terms of the tools, the systems, processes, policies, all those kind of things, to make sure that your approach to well-being is as really joined up as it could be. In terms of summary then, unfortunately, there's no such thing as a magic bullet when it comes to mental health and well-being, but hopefully what we can demonstrate and what we've set out today by laying out this framework is that if you can pay attention to all areas of the framework and pay attention to the different aspects that you need in place in terms of your approach to mental health and well-being, that puts you in a really strong position to be able to improve mental health and well-being, see it as a strategic priority and make sure that it's on the corporate agenda and as high as some of the other typical HR priorities. Every organisation is going to be different when it comes to mental health and well-being. Perhaps you're doing really well at the management capability part. Perhaps you're actually doing really well from an organisational perspective. You might be really data rich. You've got really good policies and processes. Everyone's going to have a different starting point, and use this framework to help you understand actually where are the gaps. What is my starting point? Which aspects of the framework am I doing really well on, and which do I perhaps need to prioritise a little bit more? Data is fundamental to this. We've talked about that throughout the short session today. Understanding your specific employee population. It's only really then, when you've got that clear picture of what's going on for your population, that you can make sure you've got the right support in place, and that you can also make sure you've got measurable goals over a 2, 3 or 5 year period, so that we can really track well-being improving over time. And what we don't mean there is focusing on something like absence and just seeing that as your single metric for employee mental health and well-being. There's policy and procedural things that can be done to improve absence. It's really around getting that holistic view of what are the things that are impacting employees' well-being. Is their well-being good or not? What's their psychological health look like? What pressure are they under? And being able to set goals and measurable targets in all of those kind of areas. And that final point there as we end today is really important. You can't go from 0 to 100 when it comes to mental health and well-being. It'd be foolish to think that you can try and go from nothing to a really good approach to well-being in perhaps 6 months or 12 months. This is something that takes organisations years to perfect. And again, through this framework, what it'll help you do is understand what are the priorities for you as an organisation, and what are some of the tactical moves that we can do. For example, there's no point introducing an employee training program unless you've got the right policies and systems in place. There's no point doing an employee wellbeing survey unless you've got a committee and a group of people who are going to take the results of that survey and really drive it forward. They're just examples, but you can demonstrate and you can understand the point there around, if you try and introduce everything at once, that's only going to have limited success. It's around picking your battles and trying to understand the different pieces of the jigsaw that are perhaps the right ones for you at the right time. Hopefully that's been helpful today as a really short guide and a framework to help you think around organising your approach to wellbeing, and whether that's early days in your wellbeing journey or perhaps someone who's much further on as an organisation and perhaps wants to evaluate their existing approach and make sure that it's up to speed and in line with the latest guidelines. There's more information and support on our website at robisoncooper.com. A whole heap of blogs and resources for you to kind of look through at your own time. And please do, if you've got any questions, get in touch with the team of wellbeing specialists with the email address you can see there. And best of luck in trying to prioritise health and wellbeing for your employees.